Hi everyone, this is the fourth lecture of week 8. Again, you can listen to this as an audio, and again, you want to, especially starting from this week, read the materials in Coogan and the biblical text, because I will not be going over everything, but the materials from Coogan and the biblical text, such as, for example, Yom Kippur, Azazel, Holiness Code, Ritual Decalogue, the Ark, the Tabernacle, Day of the Atonement, Scapegoat, all of this, Code of Hammurabi, and all of these bolded terms in Coogan 8 and 9 will probably appear on your quiz, though I will not be going over every single one of them. Okay, so just again, a reminder to please keep up with your readings, okay? So in this lecture, we're going to scoot all the way to the end of Exodus, to the end of the ministry of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, who are shown as generally faithfully leading the rather unfaithful or problematic Israelites through the desert for 40 years. Okay. And we are told in the book of Numbers, for example, that this group undergoes a lot of trials and tribulations, spies, searching out the land promised to them by God, battles, skirmishes, rebellions, leadership arguments. There's a lot that they go through. Okay. By Numbers 20, we come to the end of the lot for these characters. We are told in Numbers 20, verse 1, that Miriam died before reaching the promised land. And her failure to reach the promised land seems to be explained in part by an earlier tale in Numbers 12. Okay? So this is Numbers 12, verse 1 and following. While they were at Hazeroth, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had indeed married a Cushite woman. And we do not know if this is the same woman as Zipporah or not. Okay. Now back to the text. And they said, that is Miriam and Aaron, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more so than anyone else on the face of the earth. Okay. And at this point, God then tells these three that Moses is indeed his favorite, right? And the only one that gets to speak to God directly. So this again seems to be a pro-Moses, pro-Mushite text, okay? And then after telling, really putting down Miriam and Aaron, God does this, verse 10. When the cloud went away from the tent, Miriam had become leprous as white as snow. And Aaron turned towards Miriam, saw that she was leprous. Then Aaron said to Moses, "Oh, my Lord, do not punish us for a sin that we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like one of the stillborn, whose flesh is half consumed when it comes out of the mother's womb." And Moses also cried to the Lord, "Oh God, please heal her." But the Lord said to Moses, "If her father had but spit in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days? Let her out of the camp for 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again." So Miriam was shut out of the camp for 7 days, and the people did not set out on the march until Miriam had been brought in again. Okay, so lots of interesting details in this text, which I don't have time to go over here. I will simply note some of the important features, okay? Notice how both Aaron and Miriam speak out against Moses and it seems to be related to intermarriage, right? Or exogamy, right? Marriage with outsiders or groups outside of one's own group, which they seem to think is a kind of big no-no, okay? And notice, however, that though both Aaron and Miriam speak out, it is only both Aaron and Miriam speak out. It is only Miriam who is punished, right? Many scholars think that the purpose of the story is to delegitimize Miriam as a priest, as well as to delegitimize the line of priests that claim Miriam as a founder. And again, some speculate that these might have been female priests or female cultic officials, okay? Notice that Miriam is made leprous, which would make you probably unclean and maybe not, therefore, able to participate in the cult that is the caretaking of a holy being like Yahweh. Okay. In terms of the marriage or intermarriage, some wonder if there's a kind of interesting pro-intermarriage, kind of pro-exogamy element here, maybe even a kind of pro-interracial element here. Again, like I said, we don't know if this woman that Moses marries is Zipporah or somebody else. It's not clarified. However, this woman, said to be a Cushite. So what's a Cushite? So what it is, what a Cushite is, or what a Cush is a bit debated. Okay, we do know, looking at other references to Cush in the biblical text, that this is a very respected, great military power. Okay, and the area of Cush, usually people place this in modern day Ethiopia. Okay, in short, it is likely that the woman that Moses marries is African. I mean, this is in part why this tale has kind of generated some interesting attention, or certainly darker. Okay, actually, everybody in the Bible is a bit darker than we usually imagine them. And notice how Miriam's punishment. Notice how the text brings out kind of the skin tone aspect of this tale, and notice how Miriam's punishment for opposing Moses's marriage is leprosy, where her skin, we are told, is turned as white as snow. So there's some interesting plays on black and white here, and if so, one reading is that this is a very pro-intermarriage sentiment that comes out. Okay, regardless, in this unfavorable story about Miriam, where what she does is, likened to her father spitting, something so bad that her father is allowed to spit in her face, right? This is the last mention of Miriam that we get before the notice of her death in Numbers 20. Okay, and so knowing that, it's not hard to see that this story in Numbers 12 is a kind of justification for why she does not get to make it to the promised land. Okay, however, interestingly enough, she is not the only one to fail to make it to Canaan. Rather, Moses and Aaron also failed to gain entrance into the Holy Land. And of course, their failure is much harder to explain, right? But this is exactly what this mysterious story in Numbers 20 tries to do. That is to explain why Moses and Aaron, beloved Moses in particular, also failed to reach the promised land and to gain entrance into it. Okay, the story states that the Israelite group, still in the desert, ran out of water, and of course, as usual, they start complaining. At which point, God intervenes, and this is Numbers 20, verse 7. The Lord said to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and command the rock before their eyes to yield its water. Thus you shall bring water out of the rock for them. Thus you shall provide drink for the congregation and their livestock." So Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me to show my holiness before the eyes of the Israelites, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with God, and by which he showed his holiness." So, very mysterious story. We are told that God commands Moses and Aaron to produce rock for the grumbling, thirsty Israelites. And when they do so, for a very unclear reason, God becomes really angry, accuses Moses and Aaron of not trusting him, and tells them that as a result, neither Moses nor Aaron will make it all the way to the promised land. Okay. Later, in the very same chapter, in verses 22 through 29, we are told that Aaron, shortly after this, died as a result. Okay. Needless to say, this story, which seems to be an explanation for why none of the leadership made it to the promised land, notice how it doesn't really explain anything so much as raise more questions about this failure. Okay, it is not clear through the text, or at least not clear to me, what Moses and Aaron do wrong. Okay. And whenever things are not clear in the Bible, of course, what you'll get is people that will try to make sense of it, usually by acting as God's defense attorney. Okay. So some interpreters, uncomfortable with the harsh portrayal of God, argue that, Moses and Aaron, they must have done something wrong because this is a pretty egregious punishment, right? And what did Moses and Aaron do wrong? Well, maybe they didn't follow God's directions exactly. Okay, I guess instead of just letting the water come out of the rock, Moses tapped it. These interpreters really focus on the tapping as a sign of his misdeed. Okay, but notice how this interpretation doesn't really solve the problem. Okay, even if Moses got a little pissy, let's say, and tapped the rock instead of just letting it ooze water, I mean, it's what he did so bad that he, after leading a bunch of whiny people around for like forever, just because of this one thing, he doesn't get to make it into the promised land. I mean, the punishment does not at all fit the crime or the tiny mistake. Right. And what about Aaron? Like, Aaron doesn't do anything here, right? He doesn't tap the rock. He just kind of lets Moses steal the show. So why does he get punished too? Okay. Notice, whatever they did, and we've seen these stories in the Hebrew Bible before. Notice, whatever they did, it cannot really warrant God's harsh punishment. Okay. Rather, the story shows that the writers really had a hard time explaining what happened or what tradition said happened. For whatever the reason, Moses and Miriam and Aaron, according to tradition, right? They were not said to have reached the promised land. Okay. Rather, we are told in Deuteronomy 35 that Moses merely gets a glimpse of the land that he has been leading his people for these long years towards, but from which he is now forbidden to enter. Right? He is taken, we are told in this chapter in Deuteronomy 34, to the top of the mountain so that he can see all the territories that he will never reach in his lifetime. Okay? And this is what it states in Deuteronomy 34, verse 4. The Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your ancestors. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over here." Then Moses, a servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command, and he was buried in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died, and his sight was unimpaired, and his vigor had not abated. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. Okay. And this is kind of, a sad, but perhaps realistic maybe ending, right? Certainly this picture of Moses not reaching the promised land, of course, it resonates, especially in American history with Martin Luther King and so forth. In rabbinic traditions, we are told that God himself buried the body of Moses himself, right? So God himself buries sort of this great faithful servant of his in an undisclosed location. Okay. Other traditions, kind of sensing the problems in this text, posit that Moses maybe never really died, but either disappeared or maybe is kept safe by God somewhere. Okay. However, unfortunately, however, this is the ending that we get in the biblical text for Moses. It's this kind of bittersweet ending. Okay. However, before Moses finally exits the biblical stage, we find out in the book of Deuteronomy that he has like a ton of advice to give. He has like a lot more stuff to say before he actually dies. Indeed, the entire book of Deuteronomy is framed as Moses' farewell speech, detailing once again the laws or the stipulations of the covenant the Israelites are supposed to follow, right? Hence again, in part, this is why it's called Deuteronomy, second law, right? And in Deuteronomy, not only does he give out or reiterate the law, but he also kind of foreshadows or predicts how the Israelites are going to fail at keeping the covenant, and therefore kind of predict or foreshadow the exile and destruction that will happen to Israel and to Judah in the future. Okay, the book of Deuteronomy, which I'm going to go over very quickly here, also contains some really beautiful passages, the most important of which I believe is the Shema, and this is found in Deuteronomy 6, and it is used as a very important prayer in Judaism still. Okay, and the Shema runs, I'm just going to read the first two lines. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." It's a very beautiful passage in Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 6. I would recommend that you look at it. Deuteronomy is an important book, not only because of its reiteration of the laws, but also because many scholars think that they can date not only Deuteronomy, which is where most of the D source is found, but also because scholars think that the writer of the D source, right, that is the writer of Deuteronomy, is somewhat responsible for the books that follow after the Pentateuch, the former prophets, what is known as the former prophets. Okay, that is, a lot of scholars believe that the writer of Deuteronomy is in some way connected to the writers or editors who either wrote, touched up, or edited the body of text known as the Deuteronomistic history, which includes the books of Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. So a large portion of the former prophets, okay? And to see what I mean, we have to go all the way forward in biblical history and all the way forward in the biblical text, all the way past the conquest and settlement of the promised land by the Israelites, the founding of the Israelite monarchy, the building of the temple by King Solomon, the splitting up of the northern and southern kingdoms into two countries, the fall and destruction of the northern kingdom, which happens in 722. We have to go past all of that until we get to the reign of a very particular king named Josiah, who rules southern Israel or Judah, the only remaining Israelite kingdom in the 7th century. Okay, and Josiah's story is found in 2 Kings 22 through 23. We are told in those chapters that Josiah, who is a very, very, very good king, indeed maybe the best king ever, decides to refurbish the temple. And in the midst of this refurbishment, workers find the scroll, which is then read aloud to Josiah. And when the scroll is read aloud to Josiah, he starts mourning, tears his clothes, because he realizes, oh crap, whatever it is that we were supposed to be doing, which is notated in the scroll, well, we haven't been doing them, and therefore God is really mad at us and is probably going to destroy us. Okay. Now, I will come back to Josiah in a future lecture towards the end of the class, I think. But for our purposes here, what is important to recognize is that many scholars think that the scroll that Josiah finds, the one that states all these laws that the people of Judah have not been following, thereby angering God, that this scroll that is found is some early edition of Deuteronomy 12 through 26. Okay. Now, when I say, workers found or find the scroll, of course, most scholars also think that what is meant by found is not really found, right? Like, I don't think most biblicists believe that workers really digging around in the temple while they're like fixing it up, find this magical scroll, that there's a scroll here kind of magically lying around. Rather, most scholars say by find, what is meant is that someone or some group, probably some scribal group in Josiah's court, probably wrote this document. Okay, and then magically it was found. Okay, and then why do they write this document? A lot of scholars think it was to justify a religious reform. Okay, and this is what happens in the aftermath of the discovery of the scroll. Josiah, we are told, undertakes a massive restructuring of the cult system in Israel. The most important of which is that the most important component of which is that he shuts down all the smaller local shrines. Okay, the local churches, he kind of shuts them all down and centralizes worship by making Jerusalem and the temple in Jerusalem the only legit place where you can worship and offer sacrifices to Yahweh. Okay, scholars believe that someone in Josiah's time wrote the scroll. Okay, and maybe there's an older scroll underlying it. A lot of people believe that. I believe that actually. So somebody in Josiah's time wrote the scroll to legitimate the reformation of the cult, which is the major achievement of Josiah's reign. Okay. Now, the scribes who wrote kind of this nascent form of the book of Deuteronomy, well, they were very busy. This was not the only thing we think this group did. Okay, indeed, scholars reason, especially American scholars, that this group that was responsible for the scroll, for parts of Deuteronomy, were also the ones who put together, wrote, edited, shaped, the history of Israel from Joshua up to Josiah's reign in 2 Kings 22. Okay, that is a scribal group likely responsible for the book of Deuteronomy, likely touched up the books of Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. Okay, that is why these books, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, that's why these are called the Deuteronomistic history. Okay, and the group that kind of did all this or edited all this is called the Deuteronomistic historian. Unfortunately, Josiah dies really young, and the nation of Judah, the south, despite its big cultic reform, is eventually destroyed by a foreign nation. Okay, so as a result of Josiah's early death and the failure of the reform to save Judah, the textual materials, that is the history of Israel as recounted in the Deuteronomistic history, a lot of us think that this was updated, further revised by a second group of editors called the Deuteronomistic Historian number 2, or DTR2, real clever, right? To emphasize this kind of long history of the Israelite people's failure to follow God's laws, and therefore kind of indicating or showing or explaining how the destruction and exile of the country because of the people's disobedience to the covenant, how this was inevitable. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm telling you about this editorial history, which is never anyone's kind of popular thing to learn, is because we are now going to move at this point from the Torah. We're finally moving out of the Torah or the Pentateuch to discuss these books that are considered part of the Deuteronomistic history. That is the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Okay, and this editorial history explains why these books in the Deuteronomistic history, why these books emphasizes the same things that are emphasized in the book of Deuteronomy, namely, 1, the need to obey the covenant and the commandments, lest you be destroyed, right? Oh, and the most important of these laws and commandments is the one where it says that you shall worship Yahweh only and no one else, okay? And then 2, the need to worship only at the one legitimate place of worship, the temple in Jerusalem. No other place for worship is legitimate. No other God aside from Yahweh is legitimate to worship. Okay, and it's only by recognizing the scribal history that underlies these texts that you get a sense of some of the strange features that you'll find in the Deuteronomistic history. Okay, so we're going to turn to the Deuteronomistic history and the first book of the Deuteronomistic history, Joshua, in the next video, and for that, please turn to the next video.